Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Activists lash out at Morocco's loyalty ceremony as backward. Bahraini police attack protesters mourning slain teenager. And Egypt's revolutionary socialists speak out against IMF loan. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
Security forces in Rabat dispersed dozens of protesters as they were gathering to hold a symbolic ceremony in front of the Moroccan parliament Wednesday night. The demonstrators were protesting the annual loyalty and allegiance ceremonial rituals, which are usually performed by Moroccan officials in front of the king, an observance of Throne Day.
Moroccan security forces dispersed dozens of demonstrators who were taking a stand against slavery and affirming the sanctity and dignity of human life. The protesters were getting ready to hold a symbolic ceremony in front of Parliament to denounce the annual loyalty and allegiance ceremonial rituals, which are usually performed by Moroccan officials in front of the king in observance of the so-called Throne Day. Security forces used batons and sticks to prevent Moroccan activists from gathering in front of Parliament. Most of the activists were members of the February 20th movement, which called for the protest on social networking sites under the banner "A Celebration of Loyalty to Freedom and Dignity." They denounced the bowing and kneeling practices that usually take place during the king's ceremony of allegiance. Foreign news agency correspondents and Moroccan citizens were savagely assaulted over their support for human dignity, citing that all divine religions prohibit slavery. Moroccan citizens said that such practices remind them that their country is living in medieval times and not in the 21st century. They widely resent the way the king's celebration of loyalty and allegiance is being conducted. During the ceremony, senior civic and military officials, as well as politicians wearing traditional clothes, vowed loyalty to the king by bowing and kneeling down in front of him after a long wait under the direct heat of the sun. It's a display of the humiliation of the people by their king, who appointed himself as above everyone else. The celebration of allegiance and loyalty is an official ceremony held annually in the Kingdom of Morocco on July 30th, or occasionally on other dates, with the aim of renewing allegiance and loyalty to the Moroccan monarch.
Demonstrations in solidarity with male and female prisoners held in the Saudi regime's jails are continuing for the third consecutive day in the northwestern province of al-Jawf. Al-Jawf residents chanted slogans denouncing the indiscriminate campaign of political detention that is being carried out by the regime. They also held banners that read, "The people want to liberate the prisons." The demonstrators called for the immediate release of prisoners held in the Saudi intelligence-run jails in the regions of Hayat, At-Tarfiyah, and the Haban, vowing to continue the popular mobilization until their demands are met. The Bahraini police arrested 8 people following clashes with protesters. Police fired tear gas in the midst of Molotov cocktails. These clashes come days after the Bahraini police killed a Shiite young man. More details in this report.
Once again, tension returns to Bahrain's streets. Protests, then clashes, then arrests. This time, the crisis started after the mourning ceremony for young Shiite man Hussam al-Haddad ended. He was killed by the police that claimed self-defense, accusing al-Haddad and his companions of throwing petrol bombs at police members. A group of mourners held daily protests to eulogize their dead and to demand the downfall of the government. They also headed to the grave of the slain man, marking the end of condolences while chanting slogans condemning the government. This led the authorities to consider these marches to be unlicensed protests, especially since they were held after a series of demonstrations condemning the killing of the young man.
The Bahrainis who belong to the people of the house, peace be upon them, the Shiites, traditionally go in groups to the grave after receiving condolences to mark the end of the ceremonies. The problem is that the authorities view such a march as unlicensed. This issue is very problematic because the authorities are unable or unwilling to acknowledge that they are familiar with our customs and traditions.
The Ministry of the Interior broadcast these images and issued a statement announcing the arrest of 8 people following what it described as saboteurs throwing Molotov cocktails and rocks at security forces from the roof of a mosque. The ministry also accused another group of people of shutting down a number of roads and protesting without receiving prior permission.
After they ended the funeral ceremonies, they went to many alleys, not just to one place. It was an attempt to circumvent security forces. Then the forces repeatedly told them to disperse and to leave the area, but they did not do so.
These videos were posted by the opposition on social networking sites, showing protesters shutting down public roads with burning tires. The opposition also posted other videos showing clashes between the protesters and members of the police who used tear gas. The Bahraini government is accusing the Shiite opposition of adopting an Iranian agenda, but the opposition denies the claim, confirming that its demands for democracy are legitimate. Ahmad Shahab, BBC.
Egypt is starting a phase of economic advancement with the support of the International Monetary Fund. Managing director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, concluded a visit to Cairo where she discussed with Egyptian officials ways to endorse the Egyptian government's plans in the transitional period. The Egyptian government asked for nearly $4.8 billion from the IMF, which is more than the $3.2 billion that was initially proposed. Tawfiq Ahmed reports from Cairo.
توفيق أحمد من القاهرة.
After the political wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Freedom and Justice Party, clearly rejected a loan of almost $3.2 billion, the dismissed al-Ganzouri government sought to obtain the loan during a session of the currently dissolved parliament. Egypt officially asked for a loan of $4.8 billion from the IMF, while its director was in the country.
God willing, the loan will be over 5 years, with a grace period of 39 months. And the interest rate on the loan is 1.1%.
As for Christine Lagarde, the director of the International Monetary Fund, she confirmed that the fund's technical delegation will arrive in Cairo in early September to discuss the planned funding program with the Egyptian authorities. She clarified that the fund supports countries passing through critical periods.
So the IMF is a partner?
The IMF seeks to support the Egyptian government and people to strengthen stability and security, and so economists can align that with economic stability. President Morsi indicated to me that this is his goal.
Lagarde's visit came as the central bank announced in its latest statement that Egypt's foreign reserves fell by nearly $21 billion after the revolution. It also came as some parties and movements spoke of their rejection to foreign loans.
We announce our rejection of any new debt that Egypt takes from the IMF because the conditions that were imposed by the IMF and all the loans we took before exhausted the Egyptian economy and condemned it to its current status. There are many dilemmas and many problems with these loans. Most importantly is that they eliminate stable Egyptian sovereignty and render the country constantly subservient to the IMF.
If an agreement is reached between the two sides, then that will positively reflect on Egypt in 3 aspects. First, the loan will raise the value of foreign reserves. Second, it will contribute to filling the budget deficit. And finally, it will receive a certification from the IMF that Egypt is able to pay off its loans, which would then enable it to get loans from other institutions. Egypt is really striving to get a loan it believes has many advantages amid the difficult economic situation it is facing. But some economic experts believe that it will place the burden on poor citizens and further impoverish them. Tawfiq Ahmed, Dubai TV, Cairo.
Israel conveyed an implicit warning to Iran that it will face the might of the Israeli army if it takes any action. As for the United States, it rushed to send an aircraft carrier to the region ahead of schedule in light of the threats facing the Middle East, of which Iran constitutes an essential part.
In between the military threats on one hand and diplomatic calls for calm on the other, various statements on the existence of Israel and the Iranian nuclear case are being expressed by Israeli and American officials. The Israeli Army's Chief of Staff, Benny Gantz, sent a warning to those who believe they can eliminate Israel, implying Iran, whose officials reiterated that Israel is a cancerous tumor that will soon disappear. Gantz clarified that threats to eliminate Israel demonstrate an underestimation of Israel's might and capabilities. He said the Israeli army has the world's best and bravest soldiers and commanders, and they're standing steadfast along the country's borders. As for the United States, it was quick to send an aircraft carrier to the region 4 months ahead of schedule due to the threats facing the Middle East, of which Iran constitutes an essential part, according to U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta. Panetta confirmed that his country is maintaining a force in the region due to the risk of Iran blocking the Strait of Hormuz and amid the Arab Spring revolutions, which present challenges. And despite this mobilization, the U.S. continues to try to calm the situation, as the State Department spokeswoman confirmed that it conveyed a message to Israel, saying there's still time for diplomacy to solve the crisis with Iran over its nuclear program.
The Hezbollah terror organization in Lebanon has reportedly completed a massive military exercise simulating the capture of highly populated areas in Israel's northern Galilee. This according to a report in today's Lebanese al-Jawf daily, reporting that over 10,000 Hezbollah troops took part in the maneuvers, which were supervised by the terror organization's chief, Hassan Nasrallah, and senior officials from Iran's Revolutionary Guards. The report also stated that some 2,000 additional Hezbollah fighters underwent training by the elite Iranian forces. Nasrallah was quoted as calling on his military wing to prepare for the moment. U.S. President Barack Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron are warning the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad that they will be forced to intervene immediately if Damascus deploys chemical weapons or even threatens to use its deadly arsenal against the rebel forces. During a telephone conversation, the two leaders agreed that any movement of the weapons of mass destruction from Syria's stockpiles will not be tolerated and would spark an international response. The Los Angeles Times today reported that U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta instructed the American armed forces to form contingency plans to secure the chemical and biological weapons if it becomes necessary. According to the report, such an operation would entail precision airstrikes to destroy and contain the stockpile to prevent dispersal into the air, followed by raids by special forces trained to handle weapons of mass destruction. U.S. officials have said that military satellites and drones are monitoring the sites in question. Dozens of Migron residents today demonstrated outside the Justice Ministry in Jerusalem against the recommendation of Attorney General Yehuda Feinstein that the West Bank outpost be evacuated by next Tuesday. Feinstein submitted his response to the High Court earlier this week following the residents' petition claiming that the evacuation should be canceled following their purchase of portions of the land from Palestinians. National Union member of Knesset, Aryeh Eldad, attended today's rally where he told protesters that the imminent eviction is not justified. Speaker of the Knesset, Reuven Rivlin, today went to the Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital in Jerusalem, where he paid a visit to Jamal Giuliani. The Arab youth was severely beaten by a mob of Jewish teens in the city's Zion Square early Friday morning, nearly 1 week ago. Rivlin said that he came to deliver his personal apology to the 17-year-old victim and to express his condemnation over the attack. The speaker said that such acts threaten the democratic nature of the Jewish state and are becoming far too common. Hospital physicians told Rivlin that Giuliani is well enough to go home and would be released today. So far, 8 suspects have been arrested in connection to the incident, 7 of whom are also minors. Egyptian forces continue to beef up their presence in the Sinai today as part of Cairo's crackdown on suspected terrorists in the area. Additional tanks and armored personnel carriers have been deployed along the southern border. Israeli officials have expressed fear that the Egyptian government may be trying to unilaterally alter terms of the 1979 peace treaty with Israel, but they've so far refrained from issuing any official statements out of concern of straining relations with the new government of Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi. Despite opposition from the United States and Israel, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has confirmed his intention to attend next week's scheduled summit of leaders from non-aligned nations meeting in Tehran. Earlier this month, Prime Minister Netanyahu told Ban that such a move is a big mistake that would grant legitimacy to the rogue Islamic State. The objection was echoed by U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, who also advised Ban to refrain from attending the gathering, a call that was rebuffed by the senior diplomat's spokesman.
The Secretary General also takes seriously his responsibility and that of the United Nations to pursue diplomatic engagement with all of its member states in the interest of peacefully addressing vital matters of peace and security. With respect to the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Secretary General will use the opportunity to convey the clear concerns and expectations of the international community on the issues for which cooperation and progress are urgent for both regional stability and the welfare of the Iranian people. These include Iran's nuclear program, terrorism, human rights, and the crisis in Syria.
The Israeli occupation forces have released the longest-held Syrian prisoner, Sidqi Suleiman al-Maqt, after he completed his sentence 27 years after his arrest.
The Israeli occupation forces released the longest-held Syrian prisoner, Sidqi Suleiman al-Maqt, at the end of his sentence. He spent 27 years in captivity on charges of resisting the occupation and opposing its projects. According to the Syrian news agency, Sana, the longest-held Syrian and Arab prisoner by Israel, the hero Sidqi Suleiman al-Maqt has embraced freedom and returned to the occupied Golan Heights. Al-Maqt, who was born in the town of Majd al-Shams in 1967, is an Arab leftist. He was arrested on August 23, 1985, and charged with participating with some of his comrades in the establishment of an underground resistance movement in the Golan. He was subjected to different types of physical and psychological torture after the Lod military court sentenced him to 27 years in prison. He was transferred to many different detention centers, including Nafa, Ashkelon, Bir as-Sabah, Al-Ramla, Al-Damun, Tel Mond, Al-Jalameh, and Shatta. Al-Maqt became the longest-held Arab prisoner in an Israeli jail after Lebanese detainee Samir al-Kuntar, who spent nearly 30 years in Israeli prisons, was freed. The number of Syrian detainees still held in the occupation's prisons is 10, and they include the hero Shem Kamal Shams, who was sentenced for a second time to 13 years, and the militant Majid al-Shar, who was sentenced to 5.5 years, and al-Shar's son, who received 3 years. So congratulations to freedom that welcomed its new groom, in hopes of completing that circle of freedom with the release of all prisoners.
The body of Japanese journalist Mika Yamamoto was transported to Istanbul airport ahead of its transfer to Tokyo. Yamamoto was killed in Aleppo in the shelling by the Syrian regime's army.
The killing of Yamamoto, the sixth foreign journalist to be killed in Syria since the revolution began over 17 months ago, raised questions about the targeting of journalists by the Damascus regime attempting to silence the voice of truth.
This car is carrying the body of Japanese journalist Mika Yamamoto before a sad trip to her final resting place. Mika's body was transported from Aleppo to southern Turkey's city of Gaziantep before being transferred to Japan. She was killed by the gunfire of the Syrian regime's army. Mika was a victim of the targeting of journalists in the media in Syria, which probably makes the country the most dangerous place in the world for reporters. International organizations that advocate for freedom of the press are concerned about this phenomenon. citizen.
Our organization has been closely following all violations against journalists since the beginning of the Syrian revolution, whether they're committed by regime forces or the opposition's forces.
After Mika, Syrian journalist Mosaic al-Abdullah was murdered by elements of the regime's security for covering the events for media outlets, according to opposition activists. Regime forces also killed Omar al-Zamel, a media activist in Daraa, and before him, colleague Omar Khashram, our Al Jazeera correspondent, was seriously injured in Aleppo. Ali Abbas, journalist at the official Syrian Arab news agency, was killed in front of his house near Damascus, and a Syrian government television team was kidnapped. Anti-regime activists accused the government of waging a systematic campaign against journalists in an attempt to silence them. The anti-government Syrian Journalists Association estimated that 54 Syrian journalists and reporters have been killed since the beginning of the revolution. In addition, others have been injured and detained. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health for Journalists estimated that 19 journalists have been killed in Syria since the beginning of the year. French journalist Gilles Jacquier was the first foreign journalist to be killed in Syria in January 2012. French media outlets accused the regime's army of killing him. Among the most notable victims of the regime's targeting of media workers is Lebanese television cameraman Ali Sha'ban. However, the regime accuses the Free Army and the opposition of targeting government media employees. The government-funded Al-Iqbariya channel was subjected to a destructive explosion in June. The regime believes a media campaign is being waged against it. It seems that the government's understanding of war is controlling its attitude towards journalists, who convey a facet of the truth that the regime does not want the world to hear.
More foreigners join insurgents as many Syrians celebrate the army's advances in the northwestern city of Aleppo. The militants say the foreign nationals are fighting alongside them against the Syrian government. Some al-Qaeda-linked militants are also said to be among them. Fighting is underway between Syrian government forces and insurgents in the cities of Aleppo and Daraa, as well as the suburbs of Damascus. So far, at least 60 insurgents have been killed in the clashes. The Syrian army has found a massive weapons cache in the neighborhood of Aleppo. This is while thousands of people hit the streets of Aleppo to celebrate the Syrian army's victories of taking back 2 key neighborhoods from the militants' control. Reports say renovation is underway in several neighborhoods of Aleppo. Already outraged by prevalent drone attacks, Pakistan has upped its condemnation of the United States. The U.S. Embassy in Pakistan says Islamabad has conveyed a message of protest against attacks from the U.S. Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs summoned a senior U.S. diplomat to say that such attacks are unlawful and in violation of Pakistan's sovereignty. Pakistanis have on various occasions held rallies in protest to condemn drone strikes from the U.S. Washington says it's targeting militants, but many of the victims turn out to be civilians. The Taliban say they've killed at least 6 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. The Taliban say they've hit a U.S. military convoy in the city of Bagram. Afghan officials have confirmed the attack but did not give solid casualty numbers. There's been no word from the U.S. military on the incidents. So far this year, hundreds of U.S.-led Western troops have been killed across Afghanistan. Somalia's newly inaugurated parliament has met officially for the first time in Mogadishu. They've agreed to form a 15-member electoral committee to oversee the election of the new Speaker of Parliament.
On Monday, Somalia swore its new parliament in a historic ceremony as the anarchic nation tries to end 2 decades of conflict and 8 years of transitional governments. The new 275-member parliament officially met in Mogadishu, where they formed a 15-member election committee that will oversee the elections of the Speaker of the National Assembly that will culminate with the elections of the President, where Somalia will have its first formal administration in 2 decades.
The new Somali Federal Parliament has officially begun its duties after the swearing-in ceremony. We have formed a 15-member committee that will oversee the preparations of the elections for the new Somali Parliament Speaker.
Several candidates are vying for the position of the Speaker of Parliament. However, one must be a sitting lawmaker before vying for the post. The registration fee for the election of the House Speaker is $3,000, while for the first and the second deputies is $2,000 and $1,000 respectively. The election committee, however, calls on the candidates to register early enough to avoid aspirants from being locked out of the contest.
Now that the elections are around the corner, the aspirants for speaker and deputies should come forward by tomorrow and declare their candidacy to avoid last-minute rush.
Despite delays, the process of forming a new Somali government was hailed as an unprecedented opportunity for greater peace and stability in a joint statement by the United Nations, African Union, United States and European Union. New lawmakers, however, say that many issues lie ahead for the new Somali government.
The new parliament and new government have a lot of tasks to accomplish in the coming 4 years. This is a country that has been in war for a very long time, and the important thing is that recovery of state, institutions and improvement of the welfare of its people.
However, the International Crisis Group said in a press statement on Monday that the current political process has been as undemocratic as the one it seeks to replace, with unprecedented levels of political interference, corruption and intimidation.
20th August was the official deadline for the interim authority based here in Mogadishu. But presidential elections was delayed as the list of the new Somali lawmakers had not yet been agreed upon, and only 215 out of the 275 members of parliament were sworn in. Abdulaziz Bilo, Press TV, Mogadishu.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.